people like me talk to the slaves, they didn't kill him. They sent some old house Negro along behind him to undo what he said. You have to read the history of slavery to understand this. There were two kinds of Negroes. There was that old house Negro and the field Negro. And the house Negro always looked out for his master. When the field Negroes got too much out of line, he held them back in check. He put them back on the plantation. The house Negro could afford to do that because he lived better than the field Negro. He ate better, he dressed better, and he lived in a better house. He lived right up next to his master in the attic or the basement. He ate the same food his master ate and wore his same clothes. And he could talk just like his master. Good diction. And he loved his master more than his master loved himself. That's why he didn't want his master hurt. If the master got sick, he'd say, "What's the matter, boss? We sick?" When the master's house caught a fire, he'd try and put the fire out. He didn't want his master's house burned. He never wanted his master's property threatened. And he was more defensive of it than the master was. That was the house Negro. But then you had some field Negroes who lived in huts, had nothing to lose. They wore the worst kind of clothes, they ate the worst food, and they caught hell. They felt the sting of the lash. They hated their master. Oh, yes, they did. If the master got sick, they prayed that the master died. If the master's house caught a fire, they prayed for a strong wind to come along. This was the difference between the two. And today you still have house Negroes and field Negroes. I'm a field Negro.
Welcome to Seen and Heard podcast, where everyone should be seen and heard. And my co-host, Charles.
Hello.
Hello. And that Malcolm X clip was a segue into what we're going to be talking about today with Clarence Thomas and the problem with the House in.
Yeah. Are you going to play the clip?
I did. I just with Malcolm X, and then
Well,
I'm
yeah,
going to cue up the others.
Discuss the Clarence Thomas thing. Didn't you say there's a clip there for Clarence Thomas?
Oh yeah. No. Well, yeah. Actually, it's right here. Okay. So I'm going to play this clip from Fair. No, this is from the Daily.
It's from Democracy Now.
Democracy Now, and then we're going to discuss on the other side of this. So let me pull this up here.
Revealed he failed to report frequent luxury trips paid for by a billionaire Republican mega donor named Harlan Crow, who serves on the board of the right-wing American Enterprise Institute. The investigation reveals that for about 20 years, Thomas secretly accepted luxury vacations from Crow, an apparent violation of a law requiring justices and other federal officials to disclose most gifts. One vacation involved 9 days of island hopping in Indonesia aboard a 162-foot super yacht. Clarence Thomas and his wife, Ginny Thomas, flew to Indonesia on Crow's private jet. Thomas also frequently vacationed at Crow's 105-acre resort in the Adirondacks of New York. Hanging on the walls of the resort is a painting of Clarence Thomas sitting with 4 other men, including Harlan Crow, as well as Leonard Leo of the Federalist Society. Thomas never reported any of the free trips as gifts. On Thursday, New York Congressmember Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tweeted, quote, "This is beyond party or partisanship. This degree of corruption is shocking, almost cartoonish. Thomas must be impeached," she said. We're joined now by Justin Elliott, who co-authored the ProPublica investigation headlined Clarence Thomas and the Billionaire. Lay out what you found, Justin.
Yeah, well, what we found is that Justice Thomas has this extraordinary and apparently unprecedented relationship with this outside billionaire who is basically subsidizing his life. I mean, we're talking about trips on a private jet that charters for $10,000 to $15,000 per hour. cruises around the world on the super yacht that you described, regular vacations with this billionaire and his friends, who in some cases are people that have either ideological or potentially financial interests before the court.
Well, explain what the rules are for Supreme Court justices.
One of the striking things here as we got into this is just how few rules there are, especially compared to other people in the government. I've friends who federal bureaucracy who say they can't even, have somebody buy them lunch. Supreme Court justices have very few rules in terms of accepting gifts. One of the few things the law requires them to do is to simply disclose gifts, most gifts. This was a law that was passed back in the 1970s after Watergate, and Clarence Thomas, by not reporting these private jet trips and some of the other travel, appears to be in just repeat violation of that law, according to the ethics lawyers we spoke to.
So I wanted to read from your investigation. Thomas's frequent vacations at Top Ridge have brought him into contact with corporate executives and political activists. During one trip in 2017, his fellow guests included executives at Verizon, PricewaterhouseCoopers, major Republican donors, one of the leaders of the American Enterprise Institute, a pro-business conservative think tank, according to the records you reviewed. The painting of Thomas at Top Ridge, and so I want to show this for our TV audience, shows him in conversation, as we said earlier, with Leonard Leo of the Federalist Society. Explain who the other people are and what Top Ridge is.
Yeah, Top Ridge is this incredible, essentially private resort in upstate New York in the Adirondacks. It was actually built by Marjorie Merriweather Post, who is the same heiress who built what is now Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago about a century ago, to give you a sense of the kind of lavishness of the property. And this property is now owned by this Dallas real estate billionaire, Harlan Crow, and he regularly hosts Thomas there. And we're not talking about just sort of a lake house. It's a whole campus of buildings. There's a staff of chefs and waiters and that sort of thing. And, it's very difficult to find out who is on these trips with Justice Thomas. We were able to get the names of guests and on one or two occasions, even though Harlan Crow, told us in a statement that he and his friends are not trying to influence Justice Thomas. The people, for example, in the painting you just are. And
what is the sculpture behind them?
Yeah, it's a sculpture, Native American man, sort of with his hands outstretched. We're not really sure why it's there, or what it's supposed to mean. I actually saw the painter who the piece, and he said that in real life that sculpture is actually 2 or 3 times bigger, and he shrunk it in the painting for scale. But we don't really know why it's there or why they made the choice to pose in front of it. But all of the men in the painting, besides Harlan Crow, are conservative lawyers, people who are active in one way or another in the conservative legal movement. Of course, Leonard Leo, key to the choosing of justices, especially under Trump. Yeah, Leonard Leo has been very involved in creating a Supreme Court supermajority, and Harlan Crow has donated to Leonard Leo's groups, and this is a guy who now has a war chest of over $1 billion. And again, when you look at that painting, it raises a lot of questions about Harlan Crow's statement that this is all about sort of friendship and just socializing. So tell us more about who Harlan Crow, the billionaire GOP super donor, is. Can you tell us more about Harlan Crow? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? All right. While he's fixing his IFB, Justin Elliott writes in the piece that, as a quote, every man with modest tastes. We're going to turn to a clip right now of Justice Thomas speaking in the documentary Created Equal, Clarence Thomas in his own words.
I don't have any problem with going to Europe, but I prefer the United States. And I prefer seeing the regular parts of the United States. I prefer going across the rural areas. I prefer the RV parks. I prefer the walking lots to the beaches and things like that. There's something normal to me about it. I come from regular stock, And I prefer that. I prefer being around that.
That's Clarence Thomas. Your response to that, Justin Elliott, and if you can tell us more about the man he spends a lot of time with, even if he extols Walmart parking lots, and that is Harlan Crow.
Well, a couple thoughts. I mean, one is irony is the documentary you just showed, which was made by friends of Justice Thomas. It was actually financed in part by with hundreds of thousands of dollars from none other than Harlan Crow. And yeah, there's been a deliberate effort over the years by Clarence Thomas and his supporters to present him as a kind of everyman, a regular guy who likes driving around in his RV, and you know, he absolutely does drive around in his RV around the country, but you know, they've never mentioned that he also is flying around on private jets and going around on yachts, hanging out at resorts, you know, essentially private sort of boutique luxury hotels hosted by this billionaire. That has somehow never come up in all these interviews he's given about his RV. So it's you know, starkly different than the reality. With respect to Harlan Crow, I mean, he's you know, he was actually born into money. He was an heir to a major Dallas real estate fortune. He was the son who took over the family business. So he has wide-ranging business interests, particularly in real estate. But I think more relevant for this story, he's also been involved for you know, over 20 years now in conservative legal politics.
Okay, your thoughts on that nonsense?
Yeah, here's the thing though. There's a difference between conservative and, you know, just sort of liberal, moderate, you know, whatever politicians, in that, for example, when Al Franken was outed in the Me Too thing, he resigned. George Santos, he's just not going to resign, you know. Newt Gingrich, at the same time he was impeaching Clinton for having an affair, was at the time having an affair and demanding his wife not, and that was his third divorce, and not say anything about it because for the good of the country, you know? So the level of hypocrisy within conservatism, because they see themselves as doing God's work, quite literally, you know, it's okay for them to do that kind of thing. It's the same level of hypocrisy with Donald Trump. You know, this guy's entire lifestyle and actions and behavior runs totally antithetical to everything that evangelicals pretend that they care about, but in fact don't. In fact, what they do value and prioritize are white supremacist views, behaviors, actions, right? So recuse themselves. Oh, okay, yeah.
Oh, yes, the highlight here. Can you see that? The general rule is that. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, judges are supposed to recuse themselves when there's a conflict of interest. That's standard. You know, people do it all the time. They're like, well, look, I don't think it will affect my opinion, but, you know, I went to school with his cousin. And it's like, okay, well, I'm just going to recuse myself. Clarence Thomas is...
Yeah, he's not.
No, Clarence Thomas is a piece of shit who has had direct conflicts with things that he's ruled on. For example, that's why I was asking you to look it up. I think it was a case with Halliburton, and his wife was on the board of Halliburton, and he never recused himself.
Oh, yeah.
There's been numerous things that he's ruled on that would benefit corporations that he's got direct ties to. So this guy has always been corrupt. So this shouldn't be anything new. The fact that he does a whole propaganda piece to prop himself as a man of the people, just like George Bush did. You know, George Bush got elected because people were like, "Oh, he's the kind of guy I could drink a beer with." You know, he was born with a silver spoon.
Even more ridiculous.
He's a blue-blooded, literally blue-blooded. You know,
he's a house
Bushes
token.
came over on the Mayflower.
He's a house token. He's a house token, and that was just utter ridiculousness. That video, it was actually disgusting.
Yeah, so the chances of him actually doing this, and again, this story's not going to go anywhere. Oh, by the way, ProPublica is also one of those places that does good journalism. So
Mm,
ProPublica,
yep.
consortiumnews.com. There's uh, the Intercept. So
Mm,
there's a few places that do independent journalism to get away from, because otherwise all we have is as MSNBC, and they're really kind of
right.
middle of the road centrist.
There and like I said, we said before, they're all owned by billionaire fascists.
Mhm.
So MSNBC is just at the teetering point
And I
of
want I want
falling
to
off the
note
cliff.
that people should do their homework on who these guys in this painting were. The Federalist Society. You need to look up the Federalist Society because it's um, this trend within law where they wanted to invent this bullshit theory, this idea of literalism, the idea that I think they call it it's a type of constitutional law that doesn't exist in academia. So
Mm,
therefore, they created their own separate institutions like the Federalist Society, and people like Chief Justice John Roberts is a product of this, a direct product of this Federalist
mm,
Society. The idea that they interpret the Constitution literally. Again, it's from an academic point of view, it doesn't exist. It's as ridiculous as people who say I interpret the Bible literally. They don't. Nobody does.
right.
Okay? There's metaphors, there's
Well,
allegories. It's just it's a preposterous statement that even they themselves don't believe. So now they're carrying this over to the Constitution and allows them to make brutal and ignorant and vicious claims sound legitimate. And again, these people are frauds. They come from a fictive, a completely fictional legal theory that they made up themselves, and they use their power peddling, like Clarence Thomas, to get these people in. And as you heard, one of the Harlan Crow was a major player in getting these selections for the Supreme Court. And now, as a result, we've got overturning Roe v. Wade, and all of you fools who thought that you were pro-life and now have gotten rid of abortions. I can't wait till these little brown babies are born from your blonde little daughters, and you can suck it. It's going to be fucking
and
hilarious.
it's not just that. I'm going to continue to remind everybody that Roe v. Wade, overturning of Roe v. Wade, is courtesy of the white women that consistently voted Republican
Yeah,
out of spite.
yeah. No, no, and the fact that uh, this is about prenatal care. More mothers, more pregnant women are going to die. This is just it's a holocaust. It's such a backwards move. It's so primitive. Um, to think that abortion clinics are only about abortions. It's about prenatal care. It's about women's health. So they just the radical ignorance and lack of sophistication, and to embrace the fullness of the complexity of the issues at hand. I'm sorry, the conservative mind either cannot, or more likely morally is too bankrupt and refuses to face the anxiety of dealing with a question that exceeds their knowledge, and is beyond their level of ability to understand and comprehend. And so they look towards these fascist leaders to tell them what to think. And part of what they're taught to think is that somehow they think they're speaking from an original point of view.
Here is an article from the Intercept. I will post a link in the description so you guys could read the whole thing later. And it's talking about the Federalist Society and their plot to undo everything in this country. Basically, they want to do away with the Constitution. So I just highlighted this one part here. In the first week of May 2022, a draft decision penned by Justice Alito was leaked to the press, laying bare the intention of the majority of the Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade. Thanks, white women. Many legal experts warned immediately that the draft was written to not only eradicate the current federal protection to abortion access, but also to lay the legal groundwork to undo a whole host of other rights guaranteed through the 14th Amendment, protecting privacy and equality for all individuals. Alito repeated a common refrain from right wing leaders and judges all the way back to Bork, that the original interpretation of the 14th Amendment was just wrong. The ground is being set to review and revoke so many hard won gains. From access to birth control to marriage equality, 6 of the current occupants of the Supreme Court were nurtured and backed by the Federalist Society. Justice Alito, Clarence Thomas, Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett, as well as Chief Justice Roberts. The architect's plan has finally come to fruition, but this is only the beginning, not the end of their quest to make sure we're all living in a world of their creation.
Yeah, and again, people are asleep at the wheel. Future generations will look back at these conservatives, primarily white, middle class, upper middle class people, and they'll look at them with disgust. They will be the most hated generation in human history. I mean, we're talking, they're going to be looked down upon worse than people who had slaves. I mean, they're going to be looked at as just the most despicable, rotten, pathetic, spineless, weak, cowardly bastards that destroyed Earth. Let me make this clear. They killed the Earth and destroyed civilization as we know it.
Mm-hmm.
Like they said, it's just the beginning of the end. Okay? They will be the one whose names will be bloodstained on the destruction of everything. Now, you might be saying, oh, you're being a little alarmist. Okay. We're talking about the collapse of the ecosystem, of the entire biosphere that we live on. Okay? Mm-hmm. And they are hurtling us towards destruction because extraction and pollution are increasing at an exponential rate. It is not decreasing. When you hear news of, oh, things have gone down, the rate of acceleration has gone down in certain countries that are leading the way, like China is outpacing their goals. Europe is outpacing their goals. The U.S. isn't. Our commitment to curbing greenhouse gases is pathetic. And again, the reason why I say morally bankrupt and cowardly is one of the things I want to say that I, remember I said that we all have 3 things to teach in life, and here's one of them. So one of them is one of the most important moral principles, one of the most important spiritual tools, moral tools that we have to exercise is embracing anxiety. Being able to embrace anxiety and sit with it is one of the key adult behaviors that we need to exhibit in our society to be able to say, I was wrong. I don't understand. I need to look more into it. Now, this won't happen and cannot happen with the Trump types and the conservative types because they have an entire moral philosophy of don't portray weakness. Now, this can go back. I can do a whole thing on this. It goes back to this German officer who was in the U.S. Military, and he had people like Kissinger and all these other people that he taught what we call neoconservatives. And this was this whole notion of if you show weakness, you invite invasion. The idea of invading the United States military is just ridiculous. No one even can project power that far. It's just this whole paranoid, again, the paranoia, because again, we are talking about cowardice. They can't sit with anxiety. They're totally afraid. And that's why their reptilian brain takes over. So being able to embrace that anxiety and saying, I need to understand more, this issue is too complex for me, um, you know. But you have certainty on the right, and then this is where this kind of inability or refusal or spinelessness to confront that anxiety of gee, this question is beyond my pay grade, I don't understand, um, mixes with the Kruger-Dunning effect, which is this idea that people who demonstrably know less are far more confident in what they know, and they overstate. That is mixed with what's called imposter complex, where people who are intelligent and who are demonstrably more knowledgeable about a subject realize how much they don't know, and so feel a lack of confidence in what they have to say because they realize the issue is more complex than they fully grasp. So these phenomenons come crashing into our society to be led by the dumbest and the weakest and the most cowardly and the most paranoid, hysterical, spastic type of people, which is what you see with the Trumpers and the MAGAs. They're hysterical.
Well, this is by design.
No,
They have a lot of money behind them, and they're think tanks, and they're shocking our nervous system into
I don't think it's by design.
the chaos.
It's how it functions. It's the nature and function of power. When you have a lot, you develop what they call a siege mentality. The idea that the barbarians are at the gate. They're coming to take your stuff. That's why if you look at the white male, the Kyle Rittenhouse reaction to BLM, you look at white men, they were just all behind him, and church groups raised millions for him. And, you know, that whole, again, fascism, it's the barbarians are at the gate. These black and brown people that we've oppressed for so long, they're coming to get your stuff.
And we're not,
So,
and we're not going to
again,
yield. We're not going to yield.
What do you mean?
So they have another thing coming, and on that for right now, because we're in the this is the first part of our segment, and we have another part that we're going to do. So we're going to close this segment
Yeah,
out
but what do you
first,
mean
and
by
then we're going to be back later.
You're saying that their reaction to BLM and all that is we're not going to yield?
No,
Or
but well, we're not going to yield to their reaction. I mean, they're
okay.
like you were saying, they're reacting to to those protests, and we're not going to yield. If anything, Tennessee has shown it's just not going to happen. It's not. They made everything worse, actually.
Tennessee right now is such a stain. Again, they are writing their own legacy of hate and ignorance and hysteria, and it's all out in the open. But when you're pathological and narcissistic, you cannot observe your own ridiculous and preposterous and embarrassing behaviors. It's sad.
They can't be shamed right now. But we're on that. We'll be back with our second part.
All right.